You know the F-16, maybe the F-22, but can you name what came before F-1 or what was so dangerous it never left the ground? The full F-series has secrets most aviation fans have never seen. One of them will completely change how you see modern air combat. North American F-1 Fury. Originally the FJ-3 and FJ-4 Fury redesignated in 1962, it entered service in 1954 and navalized the F-86 Sabre for carrier operations. Around 1,115 swept-wing variants were built before retirement in 1965, armed with four 20mm cannons and capable of nearly Mach 0.9. McDonnell F-2 Banshee entered Navy service in 1948 as a twin-engine carrier fighter. With 895 built, it fought extensively during the Korean War and remained operational until 1959 in U.S. service. Powered by two turbojets, it reached 580 miles per hour and carried four 20mm cannons. Now this is the McDonnell F-3 Demon. Entering service in 1956, it became the Navy's first missile-focused interceptor designed from the beginning for all-weather combat. A total of 519 were built, carrying Sparrow and Sidewinder missiles while directly influencing the later F-4 Phantom II. McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II entered service with the Navy in 1960 and the Air Force in 1963. More than 5,195 were built, reaching Mach 2.23 while serving as a fighter, interceptor, and bomber. Originally gunless, Vietnam combat later pushed cannon integration into several variants. Northrop F-5 Freedom Fighter entered service in 1964 as a lightweight export fighter built under the Military Assistance Program. More than 2,800 variants were produced, with the improved Tiger II reaching Mach 1.6. The U.S. still operates F-5N as aggressor aircraft today. Douglas F-6 Skyray entered service in 1956 as a delta-wing carrier interceptor designed for rapid climbs against Soviet bombers. A total of 422 were built, briefly holding world climb records and reaching nearly Mach 1 while carrying cannons, rockets, or Sidewinder missiles. This is the Convair F-7C Dart, an experimental seaplane fighter that never entered operational service. Only 5 prototypes were built, and it became the first seaplane to break the sound barrier. The unusual water-ski design proved impractical and the project ended in 1957. Vought F-8 Crusader entered service in 1957 as a carrier-based air superiority fighter nicknamed the Last Gunfighter. More than 1,260 were built, capable of Mach 1.86 and armed with four 20mm cannons. In Vietnam, it scored 19 air-to-air victories with only 3 losses. Up next, Grumman F-9 Cougar. Entering service in 1952, this swept-wing evolution of the Panther became one of the Navy's major early jet fighters. Nearly 2,000 were built before retirement, reaching roughly Mach 0.9 and later serving extensively as a trainer aircraft. Douglas F-10 Skyknight entered service in 1950 as a carrier-based night fighter built for all-weather combat. Only 268 were produced, but it achieved the first jet-versus-jet night victories during Korea. Its 2-person crew later used it for electronic warfare missions in Vietnam. And now the Grumman F-11 Tiger. Entering service in 1956, only 199 were built before its frontline career ended quickly. It reached Mach 1.1 and became famous for a bizarre 1956 incident where a test pilot accidentally flew into his own slowing gunfire. Next up, experimental fighters and missing designations. Lockheed YF-12. First flown in 1963, this experimental long-range interceptor was developed directly from the aircraft that later became the SR-71 Blackbird. Only 3 prototypes were built, capable of Mach 3.35 and armed internally with AIM-47 Falcon missiles before cancellation in 1968. F-13 was deliberately skipped after the 1962 designation system because of superstition surrounding the number 13. The Navy and Grumman reportedly refused to assign it to what later became the F-14 Tomcat, permanently establishing the policy of avoiding -13 designations. Now this is the Northrop YF-17 Cobra. First flown in 1974, only 2 prototypes were built for the lightweight fighter competition against the YF-16. Although it lost in 1975, its design later evolved into the carrier-based F-A-18 Hornet used by the Navy and Marines. F-19 was never officially assigned and was likely skipped to avoid confusion with the Soviet MiG-19. During the 1980s, a speculative F-19 stealth fighter model became widely known, though the actual stealth aircraft program later emerged publicly as the F-117. Northrop F-20 Tiger Shark first flew in 1982 as an advanced export fighter intended to replace the F-5. Only 3 prototypes were completed before cancellation in 1986. Capable of Mach 2, it lost export relevance after approval for foreign F-16 sales. This is the IAI F-21 Kafir, an Israeli-built fighter briefly leased by the United States from 1985 to 1988. Only 12 served in American markings, operating as aggressor aircraft to simulate Soviet threats while reaching speeds of roughly Mach 2.3. Northrop and McDonnell Douglas YF-23 Black Widow II first flew in 1990 during the Advanced Tactical Fighter competition. Only 2 prototypes were built, with analysts later suggesting it may have been faster and stealthier than the YF-22, though less maneuverable overall. Grumman F-14 Tomcat entered Navy service in 1974 as a fleet defense interceptor built to destroy Soviet bombers at long range. A total of 712 were produced, capable of Mach 2.34 with variable sweep wings and armed with up to 6 AIM-54 Phoenix missiles. McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle entered service in 1976 as an air superiority fighter developed to counter the Soviet MiG-25. More than 1,198 have been built across all variants, reaching Mach 2.5 while maintaining an unmatched combat record of 104 air-to-air victories and 0 losses. McDonnell Douglas F-15E Strike Eagle entered service in 1988 as a dual-role evolution of the Eagle, combining air superiority with deep strike capability. Around 525 have been built, carrying up to 23,000 pounds of ordnance while flying combat missions across Iraq, Afghanistan, Kosovo, and Syria. Now this is the Boeing F-15X Eagle II. First delivered in 2021, it represents the most advanced F-15 variant ever built. With 144 planned and deliveries ongoing, it carries the largest payload of any U.S. fighter, including up to 22 AIM-120 missiles. General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon entered service in 1978 as a lightweight multi-role fighter using revolutionary fly-by-wire controls. More than 4,600 have been produced, making it one of the world's most widely operated fighters while reaching Mach 2 and carrying extensive guided weapons. McDonnell Douglas F-A-18 Hornet entered service in 1983 as the Navy and Marine Corps' first true fighter attack aircraft. Around 1,480 legacy variants were built, replacing both the F-4 Phantom and A-7 Corsair while serving extensively in the Gulf War, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor entered service in 2005 as the world's first operational 5th-generation air superiority fighter. Only 195 were built, featuring stealth, thrust vectoring, and supercruise above Mach 1.8 without afterburners. Despite unmatched capability, production ended early because of cost reductions. Now this is the Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II. Entering service between 2015 and 2019 across A, B, and C variants, more than 1,000 have already been delivered. It combines stealth, sensor fusion, internal weapons bays, and the most powerful single fighter engine ever built. Let's start with America's first post-war jet fighters. This is the Lockheed F-80 Shooting Star. Entering service in 1945 and redesignated F-80 in 1947, it became America's first operational jet fighter. Developed in only 143 days, it later scored America's first jet-versus-jet victories during the Korean War. The F-80 reached 580 miles per hour, and 1,715 were built before retirement. Next up, the consolidated Vultee XF-81. First flown on February 11, 1945, this unusual prototype combined a propeller-driven engine in the nose with a turbojet in the rear fuselage. engineers temporarily installed a P-51 Mustang Merlin engine for testing. Only 2 prototypes were built, and the project ended before entering service. And now the North American F-82 twin Mustang. Entering service in 1946, it joined 2 P-51 Mustang fuselages into a single long-range escort fighter. Originally designed to accompany B-29 bombers to Japan, it arrived too late for World War II. Around 272 aircraft were built before retirement in 1953. Continuing with early experimental fighter projects, this is the Bell XF-83, originally developed as a long-range escort jet fighter during the final years of World War II. First flown on February 25, 1945, it suffered from limited engine performance as jet technology rapidly advanced. Only 2 prototypes were completed, and the program was cancelled in 1947 before production began. Next up, the Republic F-84 Thunderjet. Entering service in November 1947, it initially faced serious structural and engine problems that nearly ended the program. It later became the primary USAF strike aircraft during the Korean War, flying 86,408 sorties. A total of 7,524 were built, and the F-84G became America's first operational nuclear strike fighter. Moving into some of the most unusual fighter concepts ever tested, this is the McDonnell XF-85 Goblin. First flown on August 23, 1948, it was designed as a parasite fighter that could be launched and recovered from the bomb bay of a B-36 bomber. Its compact, egg-shaped fuselage fit inside the aircraft, but docking proved difficult. Only 2 prototypes were built before cancellation in 1949. And now the North American F-86 Sabre. Entering service in 1949, it became one of the most successful jet fighters ever produced. Engineers adopted swept-wing technology using German wartime research, greatly improving performance. An F-86A soon set a world speed record of 670.9 miles per hour. Nearly 9,860 were built, and the last operator retired it in 1994. Continuing with the fighters built to defend American skies, this is the Curtiss-Wright XF-87 Blackhawk. First flown on March 5, 1948, it represented the final aircraft project produced by Curtiss-Wright. The Air Force initially ordered dozens of fighters and reconnaissance variants, but the contract was quickly cancelled in favor of the Northrop F-89. Only 2 prototypes were completed, and neither survives today. Next up, the McDonnell XF-88 Voodoo. First flown on October 20, 1948, it competed for a long-range penetration fighter requirement and reached roughly 700 miles per hour with afterburners. Despite outperforming the XF-90 in competition, defense budget reductions ended the project. Only 2 prototypes were built, but the design later evolved into the F-101 Voodoo. And now the Northrop F-89 Scorpion. Entering service in September 1950, it became America's first jet-powered all-weather interceptor. Designed to defend against Soviet bomber threats, it later carried the nuclear-armed MB-1 Genie rocket. On July 19, 1957, an F-89J fired the only live air-to-air nuclear weapon in history. A total of 1,052 aircraft were built. Finally, the last fighter in the F-80 through F-90 sequence. Now this is the Lockheed XF-90. First flown on June 3, 1949, it was developed by the Skunk Works team under Kelly Johnson for the penetration fighter competition. Its swept-wing design looked far ahead of its era, but underpowered engines limited performance. Only 2 prototypes were built, and one was later exposed to atomic blast testing in Nevada.
Let's start with the aircraft that never made it off the drawing board or barely did. Lockheed XF-90. First flown June 3, 1949, this Skunk Works penetration fighter was designed to escort bombers deep into Soviet territory. Only 2 prototypes were built. It was the first USAF jet fitted with afterburners and the first Lockheed jet to go supersonic, but only in a dive. It lost its competition and was later destroyed in nuclear weapons testing. This is the Republic XF-91 Thunderceptor. First flown May 9, 1949, it combined a jet engine with 4 rocket motors for rapid interception climbs. Only 2 prototypes were built. One became the first American fighter to exceed Mach 1 in level flight. Its wings were wider at the tip than the root, a deliberate design to prevent deadly high-speed pitch-up. Program cancelled. Now this is the Convair XF-92A, first flown September 18, 1948. It was the world's first jet aircraft to fly with a delta-wing configuration, pioneered by German aerodynamicist Alexander Lippisch. Only one was built. Chuck Yeager flew it for the USAF. Test pilots hated it. It flew over 300 times regardless, directly shaping the later F-102 Delta Dagger. Next up, the penetration fighters aircraft built to escort bombers deep into Soviet territory and destroyed by their own ambition. North American YF-93. First flown January 24, 1950, it began as a stretched F-86 Sabre redesignated F-86C before growing so different it earned its own designation entirely. Only 2 prototypes were built. It offered double the F-86's unrefueled range at over 2,000 nautical miles. The Korean War redirected USAF priorities toward cheaper, proven designs. Both prototypes survived as NACA research aircraft until 1956. Continuing with the only aircraft in this entire range that entered full production and went to war, Lockheed F-94 Starfire. Entering service May 1950, it was the first operational USAF fighter equipped with an afterburner and the first jet-powered all-weather interceptor to enter combat during the Korean War. Derived directly from the T-33 trainer, 855 were built across 3 variants. The F-94C carried 48 folding fin rockets in a nose ring and 0 guns, an all-rocket interceptor. Retired 1959. Next up, aircraft that were assigned designations and then immediately renamed before a single production model flew. This is the F-95, which became the F-86D Sabre Dog. First flown December 22, 1949, it was originally designated YF-95 during development despite sharing only 25% of parts with the original F-86 Sabre. Renamed F-86D before production began. No guns, only a retractable tray of 24 unguided rockets. Entered service 1951, retired 1965. 2,847 were built, making it one of the Cold War's most produced jet interceptors. Now this is the F-96, which became the F-84F Thunderstreak. First flown June 3, 1950 as the XF-96A, a swept-wing evolution of the F Thunderjet. Renamed F-84F before production because engineers expected over 55% parts commonality with the Thunderjet, a figure that proved wildly optimistic. Entered service May 1954, retired 1972. 3,428 were built. Tactical Air Command variants carried nuclear bombs using the low-altitude bombing system. This is the F-97, which became the F-94C Starfire. Lockheed's proposed designation for an advanced Starfire variant was quietly absorbed back into the F-94 family before any aircraft flew under the F-97 label. The resulting F-94C featured a thinner wing, more powerful Pratt & Whitney J48 engine, and a Hughes fire control system. Not a single airframe ever officially carried the F-97 designation in operational service. Finally, the strangest entries in this entire range, 2 designations given to weapons that were never manned aircraft. This is the F-98 Falcon, a missile. In 1951, the USAF classified guided air-to-air missiles as fighters, assigning the Hughes Falcon the designation F-98. It was the first operational guided air-to-air missile in USAF history. Entered service 1956. In 1955, the USAF reversed course, redesignating it GAR-1, later AIM-4. Over 26,000 were eventually built. In Vietnam, it failed repeatedly against maneuvering MiGs it was specifically engineered to destroy. Now this is the F-99 Bombark, also a missile. A surface-to-air interceptor missile jointly developed by Boeing and the Michigan Aeronautical Research Center, it received the fighter designation F-99 because the USAF considered it an unmanned aircraft. First test flight September 10, 1952. Operational September 1959. Capable of Mach 2.5 at 60,000 feet. Each carried a W-40 nuclear warhead. Retired 1972. It was the only surface-to-air missile ever operated by the United States Air Force.
The North American F-100 Super Sabre entered service in 1954 as the first U.S. fighter capable of supersonic speed and level flight. 2,294 were built across 5 variants. It flew more combat missions over Vietnam than any other aircraft, losing 242 airframes in the process. Retired from the Air National Guard in 1979. The McDonnell F-101 Voodoo entered service in 1957, originally designed as a long-range bomber escort. 807 were built. It became the first USAF aircraft to exceed 1,000 mph and was repurposed as a nuclear strike aircraft and interceptor. The RF-101C variant photographed Soviet missile sites during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Retired 1982. The Convair F-102 Delta Dagger entered service in 1956 as the world's first supersonic all-weather interceptor. Over 1,000 were built. It was the first operational aircraft to use area rule fuselage design and carried no guns, relying entirely on missiles. 14 were lost in Vietnam. Retired from combat service in 1976. The Lockheed F-104 Starfighter entered service in 1958 as the first combat aircraft capable of sustained Mach 2 flight. 2,578 were built across all nations. It simultaneously held the world's speed, altitude, and rate of climb records. Its unforgiving handling killed so many pilots in German service it earned the nickname Widowmaker. Retired from Italian service in 2004. The Republic F-105 Thunderchief entered service in 1958 as a Mach 2 supersonic strike aircraft. 833 were built across the B, D, and F variants. It carried the heaviest bomb load of any single-seat aircraft in Vietnam. Of 833 built, 382 were lost to combat and accidents, over 45% of the entire fleet. Retired 1984. The Convair F-106 Delta Dart entered service in 1959 as the ultimate development of the Delta Dagger. 342 were built. It reached Mach 2.3, making it the fastest of the entire Century series. In 1977, one entered an uncontrolled spin, the pilot ejected. The aircraft recovered on its own and landed intact in a Montana field. Retired 1988. The Republic XF-103 never entered service. Designed in the early 1950s as a Mach 3 delta-wing interceptor capable of destroying Soviet bombers at extreme altitude, it was canceled before a single prototype flew. The technology required was too far ahead of what American engineering could reliably deliver at the time. 0 airframes were completed. The North American F-107 Ultra Sabre never entered service. Based on the F-100, it featured a radical over-fuselage air intake mounted directly above the cockpit. 3 prototypes were built and flew. It lost the tactical strike competition to the F-105 Thunderchief, and all 3 prototypes ended their careers as research aircraft. 2 survive in museums today. The North American XF-108 Rapier never entered service. Designed as a Mach 3 long-range interceptor to escort the XB-70 Valkyrie deep into Soviet airspace, it was canceled in 1959 before any prototype was completed. When the Soviet Union shifted from bombers to ICBMs as its primary nuclear delivery system, the entire requirement ceased to exist. The F-109 never received an official assignment. The designation was requested multiple times for a VTOL supersonic interceptor for the 2-seat F-101B variant and for an operational version of the Ryan X-13 Vertijet. None were approved. No aircraft ever carried the designation F-109 in any official USAF records. The number simply disappeared. The McDonnell F-110 Spectre never flew under that name. 2 Navy F-4H-1 Phantoms were delivered to the Air Force in USAF markings with F-110A painted on the nose for evaluation. Before production began, Secretary of Defense McNamara forced a unified designation system in 1962. The F-110 was redesignated F-4 Phantom II, the most produced Western jet fighter of the Cold War. The General Dynamics F-111 Aardvark entered service in 1967 as the world's first variable sweep wing production aircraft. 566 were built. It pioneered terrain-following radar for automatic low-level supersonic flight. North Vietnamese crews called it Whispering Death. In 1986, it flew the longest fighter combat mission in history, a 13-hour, 6,400-mile round-trip strike against Libya. Retired 1998. Between F-111 and F-117, 5 designations were consumed by classified programs. F-112 through F-116 were assigned to captured Soviet MiGs, MiG-21s, MiG-23s, and related variants flown secretly out of Area 51 under programs including Have Donut and Constant Peg. American pilots used them to study Soviet tactics. These designations were never publicly acknowledged. Officially, they did not exist. The Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk entered service in 1983 as the world's first operational stealth aircraft. 64 were built. It was kept fully classified until 1988. Its radar cross-section was equivalent to a small bird. In the 1991 Gulf War, it flew 2% of coalition sorties but struck over 40% of strategic targets. Officially retired 2008.